Alright, so this video is going to be on helping you solve equations that have fractions in your equation. And there's some different ways of doing that, but I'm going to try to show you the easiest method for being able to handle this. Alright, so here we go. There are some steps that we can follow to try to help us out and give us some guidance with this. And so the first step, it says right here, is to get rid of all of your grouping symbols by distributing where necessary. Your grouping symbols in this situation are going to be parentheses. They could be brackets, or they could be braces, or they might even be absolute value bars. There's a lot of different types of grouping symbols that you could have. So what we're going to do then is we are going to distribute. And we're going to distribute the 2/5 times the 3x. And that's going to give us 6/5 x. We're now going to distribute 2/5 times 1, which is 2/5. Equals, and then distribute here, which is 1/6 x, and 1/3 times 6 is 6/3, or 2. Now, step 2 says determine what your least common denominator is. So we have this equation that has fractions in it, and that's going to make life more difficult. So we want to get rid of our fractions. And we're going to do that by following these next steps. Find the least common denominator. Well, if you have 5, 5, and 6 for your denominators, that means your least common denominator is going to be 30. That means 5 and 6 will both go into 30 evenly. Alright, so what we do now is multiply every term in our equation by that common denominator. Alright, so let me just rewrite our problem that we had here. 6/5 x plus 2/5 equals 1/6 x. I'm going to go ahead and combine the 2 minus 1, which would be just a plus 1 right here. And we're going to multiply this whole thing by 30. Now, multiplying by 30 means we're going to multiply 30 times this first term. Now, remember that 30 times 6 over 5 means that we can cross-reduce the 5 and the 30. 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 30 6 times. Now we have 6 times 6, which is 36 x. Alright, so now we're going to multiply 30 times 2/5. And 30 times 2/5, we can do the same thing we did before, which is cross-reduce. 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 30 6 times. Now you have 6 times 2, which is 12. Equals, and we continue the same process. 30 times 1/6 is equal to 5, and 30 times 1 is equal to 30. Alright, so what we have just accomplished was getting rid of our fractions in the equation. We can now just go forward and solve this like we normally would. Alright, so we had 36 x plus 12 equals 5x plus 30. So our next step then is going to be combining like terms on each side of our equation. You cannot combine this term with this term. This has a variable, this one does not, which means you cannot combine those two things together. Same thing over here. 5x and 30 cannot be combined together. Alright, so we can skip step 4. The next thing is move your variable terms to one side of your equation. All right, so we have a variable term here and a variable term here. We're going to move 5x over to this side, and you're going to move it by subtracting, which will give you 31x. Now, in this same step, we're also going to move the constant terms to the other side. All right, well, our constant term is 12 and 30. So we're going to move 12 over to the other side by subtracting it, and 30 minus 12 is 18. And your last step is isolating the variable, which simply means we're going to divide by 31. We're going to divide 31 over to the other side, giving us x is equal to 18 over 31. All right, so the next problem just happens to not have any grouping symbols. So if there are no grouping symbols, we do not have to distribute. We can go straight to multiplying by our common denominator. Now, our denominators here are 5, 2, and 3. The number that, or the smallest number that all three of those will divide evenly into is going to be 30. So we're going to multiply 30 times 2/5. Remember, the 5 and the 30 will reduce to a 6. So that gives us 6 times 2, which is 12x. All right, so now we're going to multiply 30 times 1/2, which is 15. And then 30 times 2/3. Right, the 3 and the 30 reduce to 10. 10 times 2 is 20. All right, so now we have a much easier problem. We're just going to move our constant term over to the right, which will give us 12x is equal to 5. And dividing by 12, x is equal to 5/12. All right, so we're going to distribute here. 2/3 times 12. Remember, the 3 and the 12 will reduce to a 4. 4 times 2 is 8. So this becomes 8x. 2/3 times 5. This time the 3 does not reduce with the 5. So we just have to go ahead and multiply it. 2 times 5, which will give us 10/3. All right, 1/2 times 7 is 7/2, and 1/2 times 9 is 9/2. All right, so common denominator. We have a 3 and we have a 2. So the number that both of those, or the smallest number that both of those will divide evenly into, is going to be 6. So that is what we will multiply every term by. So 6 gets multiplied first by the 8, and that will give us 48. And then 6 times the 10/3, remember the 3 and the 6 reduce to a 2. 2 times 10 is 20. 7/2 times 6, 21x. And 9/2 times 6 is 27. We're now going to move our variable terms to one side, so I'm going to subtract 21x over to this side, and that will give us 27x. Move the constant terms to the other side, so we're going to subtract 20. That gives us 7. And then the last step is to isolate x by dividing by 27, which will give us x is equal to 7 over 27. All right, so let's go through some of these. Distributing, you're going to get 3/4 x plus 6 minus 1/2 x. 4/5 times 10 is going to give us 8x. 4/5 times 1 is 4/5. And we got minus 1/4. All right. Got rid of the grouping symbols, so now let's take a look at our denominators. You have a 4, a 2, a 5, and another 4. All right, so the smallest common denominator here is going to be 20. All right, so 3/4 times 20 is going to give us 15x. 6 times 20 is 120. Then a half times 20 is 10x. All right. Then 8 times 20 is 160. 4/5 times 20 is 16. 1/4 times 20 is 5. We're now going to combine some like terms. All right, so we have a 15x and a minus 10x that are on the same side of our equation. Combining those is 5x. The 120 does not combine with anything. On the right side, we can combine together the negative 16 and the negative 5 to give us a negative 21. We're now going to move 5x over to the left by subtracting it. That is 155x. We're going to move 21 over to the left by adding it, which is 141. And dividing will give us 141 over 155. All right, let's take a look at our next problem here. This time we have a combination of parentheses and brackets. So when you have a combination of grouping symbols, you always want to start from the inside and work your way out. So the first thing we're going to do is multiply together the 3/4 and the 2, and then 3/4 and the 1. We want to distribute this 3/4. The 1/2 that is located outside, we're going to leave that alone, as well as the brackets. So multiplying here, you're going to get 3/2 x minus 3/4. And then we've got a plus 2/3 equals 7x plus 2. Now we want to distribute this 1/2. And so we're going to multiply it by each one of these. All right, so distributing here is going to give us 3/4 x minus 3/8 plus, and then the 2's will cancel on this next fraction, leaving us with 1/3. Then we have 7x plus 2. We have now gotten rid of all of the grouping symbols, which means we can multiply the whole equation by our common denominator. Now our denominators are 4, 8, and 3, which means our least common denominator is going to be 24. So 24 times 3/4 is 18x. 24 times 3/8 9. 24 times 1/3 is 8. 24 times 7 is 168. And 24 times 2 is 48. We're now going to combine like terms. The negative 9 and the plus 8 becomes a minus 1. And we're going to move the 18x over to the right side. By subtracting it, will give us 150x. We're going to move the 48 to the left side by subtracting it, which is negative 49. And then dividing is going to give us x equals negative 49 over 150.